In the series premiere of Snowpiercer, the Earth got really hot thanks to global warming and wars, so scientists just decided, hey, we'll just cool it down, but that didn't quite work, and the Earth ended up freezing up. And there was really only one guy who thought, hey, maybe we should plan for this, and his name was Mr. Wilfred. So he decided to build the Snowpiercer train. 1,001 car lengths that would continuously just circle the globe and never stop. The issue is, pretty much everybody who had a ticket for the Snowpiercer train caused the global freeze, which left the poor and middle class to try to storm the gates and get on. And that's exactly what they did. Right before it left, they stormed the gates, were able to get on, and while security threw a couple of them off, the train left, wasn't going to open back up the doors, and the poor and middle class people were on the train in the very last car. And the show picks up 6 years later where those same people, nicknamed tailies because they're at the tail end of the train, are planning a revolt. And there's many reasons why they're planning this revolt, but mainly it stems from the fact that they're treated like shit. They're kind of used as slave labor from the rich anytime they're needed. And they're sterilizing the women, so it seems like they're just trying to kill off the tailies. And their rations got cut once again. And they're already divvying up their rations between the rats that they own and this guy named Big John, who by far is the strongest and who's someone that they're going to need if they want to revolt. And the revolt is going to be led by a guy named Andre Layton, and he's very hesitant to just okay the revolt because 3 years ago they tried the same thing and they didn't know what cars were up ahead. And because of that, 60 plus tailies ended up getting slaughtered and 13 people had their arms cut off. So Layton just simply wants them to be careful if they're going to do this, but his hesitation has one of the tailies, a guy named Pike, wondering if he's even the right guy for the job. But they're running out of time, and like it or not, Layton is going to have to go along with the plan. And the plan is pretty simple. When security brings in their food rations, they're going to bum rush them, and that's going to tip off the revolt. So they have all their makeshift weapons, and they're just waiting to make their move. And one of the tailies, a guy named Old Ivan, ends up giving a weapon to Andre, saying, you can make use of this better than I can, because Old Ivan's one of the guys who had his arm cut off. And he also tells him that the car is really set up like a social class. The farther you get on the train, the richer it gets. And that's very true. I mean, the problems at the front of the train are like, there's an issue with the sauna. And the problems with the tail of the train are, how are we going to eat? And the only time anybody from the front of the train visits the tail is to give them food, and that's why they're planning on making their move when they get their food. But when the food arrives, a woman named Ruth from hospitality is with them, and that's a pretty weird thing. And she makes an announcement asking Andre Layton to come forward, and nobody knows why. And because of that, Andre gives a signal to stand down and not attack, but he himself is wondering what's going on. And after an invasive physical, they give him a jacket that says sanitation, and they bring him to the third-class dining car. And when he's brought there, it's the first time he's actually seeing light in 6 years because the tail has no windows. And in the dining car, he meets a guy named Roach who is called a brakeman, but really he just runs security on the train. And he's given a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup. And after devouring the sandwich, Roach says, we know in your past life you were a homicide detective. And Layton looks at them and says, aren't you guys cops? But most of them weren't cops. In fact, one of them was a former soccer player. And the reason they want to talk to Andre is because there's been a murder. And they bring him to the body, and it's a guy who's been chopped up and his dick has even been cut off. But even after seeing the body, getting some food, he doesn't want to help them out because he feels like he'd be a traitor. He just wants to go back to the tail. He tells them, you guys figured out yourself. And the soccer player, brakeman, decides the best course of action is to kick the shit out of him. And when Roach sees that, he gets really pissed off because it's not exactly the way you get a guy on your side. And then Andre gets introduced to Melanie, the head of hospitality. And immediately Andre recognizes her voice because that's the voice that everybody hears on the train every single morning and sometimes at night. Anytime there's an announcement on the train, you hear Melanie's voice. And she's there because Wilfred wants this solved immediately. And she lets him know that doors will open anywhere his investigation leads him. And Roach makes mention that the same thing happened a couple years ago where a guy was chopped up and his dick was cut off. But they have somebody in prison for that. So either they have a copycat or they have the wrong person in jail. So Layton thinks about it and says, I'll do it for rations and third-class immigration for everybody in the tail. And Roach flips his lid saying that the passengers had tickets. The crew, they had jobs. You guys just bum rush the train. You don't have rights. And then Melanie is able to calm Roach down. She makes Roach uncuff Layton and says, you're the only homicide detective on the train. And Wilfred is simply asking you to contribute. But he still hasn't agreed to anything. He is, however, taken to their version of a prison, where criminals are put to sleep, put away in a drawer, and looked at by a doctor. And the woman who was accused of the murder is a woman named Nikki Jeanette. And they want to wake her up, but the problem with that is she's been asleep for 2 years. And by waking her up, that would be the longest anyone's ever been asleep and then woken up. But since she was the only witness to the murder, they don't really have a choice. Roach then takes Layton through third class with a bunch of young people just screwing each other because he wants him to talk to some of the current suspects. And the first suspect that he sees is a woman that he used to date back in the old days, a woman named Zara. And she was currently dating the victim. and he's pissed off at her for letting them know that he used to be a homicide detective. But she says, it's just like the tale. There's no justice here. They could have pinned this on any of us. And the two have a very contentious relationship because he looks at her like a sellout and she looks at him like an idiot who thought he could use his cop connections to get them on Snowpiercer. And when that didn't work, they had to bum rush the train. And she didn't want to live in the tale and she sold out. And when she sold out, she fell in love with this guy, but he just got murdered. So after a quick chat with Zara, Roach takes him through a couple other cars that have trees growing and a bunch of fruit. And he's just amazed that they have 130 cars growing all this fruit and they can't share any of it with the tail. And in that car, he sees Melanie once again and says, you pulled out all the stops. I mean, you got my ex to talk to me, you got me some food, and you just thought I would do anything, didn't you? But Melanie just simply asked for an update, and he says, well, Zara didn't kill him, I'll tell you that. And I know that there's more to this because why would you be so desperate for my help? Pretty simple to me. You're worried that a murder will disrupt Mr. Wilfred's order. So if you want to keep eating your strawberries up here, you know my demands. Third-class citizenship, rations, and the reproductive rights back. And that one he just added. And in a very complicated way, she tells him that he actually needs them more than Mr. Wilfred needs him. After she leaves talking to Leighton, she goes to talk to somebody named Jinju, who is making her some sushi. And she goes on to explain how they have to wake up Nikki. She also asks Jinju if she can help out the doctor with the process. And Jinju asks if Leighton has even agreed to help them, which he hasn't yet, but Melanie reassures her that he will. And once they find the murderer, Jinju can go back to her work. Now, things haven't gone great in the tale since Leighton got taken, and Pike has tried to take that leadership role, thinking that the reason that Leighton told them not to attack was because he knew that they were coming for him, even though that's not true at all. And a woman named Josie tells him as much. And Pike wants to attack, and the straw that breaks the camel's back is when old Ivan kills himself. And they kind of use old Ivan's death as a rallying cry. And the brakemen have to remove a dead body. So they open the doors and they go to remove old Ivan's, and that's when the group attacks. And when they revolt, word gets to Leighton that they are revolting, and he says, let me handle this, they'll listen to me. So they send Leighton in, but the group is very hostile. Pike especially thinks he's a traitor. Pike says, it's only going to end one way, and Leighton says, yeah, you're right. They're going to storm in here and butcher us. Leighton gets Pike to stand down by saying, I think I found a way to get us out of this alive. He then walks up to Till, the brakeman hostage that they had, and punches her in the face. And Pike and the others are about to once again turn on him, but he says, no, you don't get it. You surrender yourself. It's not that bad. They simply put you to sleep. Get put to sleep. Go in the drawers. He goes on to explain that he's been up 130 cars and seen things that they can only imagine. And because of the murder investigation, he can piece together security schedules and details about the cars. And at this point, Pike breaks down saying, we only made it one car, man. I'm done. But Leighton assures him that they need him up train waiting in the drawers for the day that they take the engine. But when they go to turn themselves in, Ruth says, they're not going in the drawers. Mr. Wilfred wants swift justice. So Leighton says, I'll solve your murder if you have mercy on the tail. And Melanie says, well, he will want justice in the sense of taking one arm, but nobody else is going to die today. And after settling down that mess, Melanie heads back to her room, changes out of some clothes, and then heads to the very front of the train. And her and the driver, Ben, exchange a little chit-chat about the bumpy terrain they're going to be going through the next day. But as he leaves, he says, you have the train, Mr. Wilfred, because this whole time, Melanie is actually Mr. Wilfred. Episode 2 starts at the very next day where Melanie wakes up and opens up a cabinet and you see a picture of her from the old world holding a baby. And we don't know if it's her baby or her niece or a nephew, but it's there. She acknowledges it and then she goes about her day. Where the train is shaking a little bit because they're going through that stretch of rough track. And at the speed they're going, they're triggering avalanches pretty much everywhere they go. And the one engineer is recommending that they throttle back 12%, but the problem with that is the train uses its speed to create electricity. And if you throttle it back, you have to enforce rolling blackouts. And that's something Melanie just doesn't want to do. He says, you can slow for safety or you can speed up for electricity. And she says, keep going the same speed. She then heads into first class where apparently word travels fast because they know pretty much everything about the previous day. But the thing that they're most upset about is the fact that they got a tailie to be the detective. And Melanie reassures all of them that he was a homicide detective in the old world and he's simply the best man for the job. That same morning, Pike, Big John, and the others are put to sleep and Ruth goes to get that arm. And initially, she grabs a child who helped with the revolution. But the child's mother stands up and goes, no, take mine because I allowed her to do it. And Ruth makes a speech about accountability, and then she wets the person's arm and sticks it in a hole out of the train. And with the wetness and the temperature being minus 100 plus, the arm freezes up, and then brakemen take a mallet to it and break it off. But as soon as they do that, she's not doing well at all, to the point where her son has to go suck off the soccer player brakeman just to get some meds. But he doesn't get meds. Instead, he gets drugs. And at this point, he's willing to do anything to take the pain away from his mother, so he gives them to her. And at that same time, Leighton and Till go off to do some detective work, and they pass by a bunch of sanitation workers. And Leighton definitely recognizes one of them, but he just simply doesn't say anything. The first stop they go to is to talk to the guy who found the body. And they go to the third-class noodle place, which is apparently the best place to get noodles on the train. And he tells Layton how he found the body. He was going about his business, he popped a floor panel, and there was the guy. And there's a lot of people that pass through that tunnel, so there's a lot of suspects. They then head off to the scene of the first murder, a place called the Night Car. And this is basically a nightclub, but it might also be a brothel. It kind of has that lore about it. And this is a place where Nikki, the girl who was put under and being woken up, used to work, and this is where they found the body. And it's worth mentioning that Nikki is being woken up, but she is not doing well at all, to the point where they're actually worried that she's dealing with neurological issues. It's basically a worst case scenario for them, and it's all from being asleep for so long. But back to the Night Car, where Layton talks to the owner of the place, and she explains how Nikki was found in the room with the body, who was a regular of hers, but Nikki was all drugged up, and she thinks that Nikki was drugged up by the real killer, and Wilfred simply just wanted justice done so quickly, so Nikki got put in a drawer. Layton then sees Zara because Zara works there, and the owner says, I think he probably should experience what Nikki was doing in there. And he's always wondered what goes on in the Night Car. And while it has the reputation of being a brothel, it's not. You go into a room and you basically, through a meditation process, can kind of travel back to the way the world used to be. And when Layton, along with Zara, does that, he travels back to the time where he proposed to Zara. And when they snap out of it, they immediately start banging each other's brains out. When they're getting dressed, she says she thinks Sean, the dead body, was an informant because they used to get all these perks, including winning the baby lottery. And usually if you win something like that, you have friends up car. And there's clearly something that they're not telling him about this case. And she was fully committed to having that baby with Sean, and Layton, who obviously had a romantic relationship with her because they were engaged, says, did you love him? And she kind of brushes it off saying, it's Snowpiercer. But she does want Layton to come back and be with her in the third class. And he says, I can't. I have a responsibility to the tale. Layton and Till then head to the autopsy, where it's really a doctor. She's never done an autopsy before, but she knows her way around a body. And since Till in the old world wanted to eventually become a detective, Layton allows both of them to try to figure out exactly what happened in the crime scene. And they do a pretty good job, but the one place that they don't notice is who had the proper tools to cut off arms and legs. And it was the butcher. And immediately Till is disgusted because she ate beef noodles that day, and Layton is kind of implying that maybe Sean was cut up for food. So they go to visit the butcher, but he doesn't let them in because they're slaughtering cows that day, and he basically tells them, piss off, come back with a warrant. And as they're walking away, the train gets hit with a really bad avalanche, and everybody in the train kind of goes flying, including the butcher. And when he does so, he's got the item they have to kill cows in his hand, and it ends up smashing into the glass and puncturing a hole in it. And because it's insanely cold outside, everything in that one car slowly dies and freezes up. And I'm talking the people, the cows, everything in there. And now with the butcher not in their way, they head into the freezer to see if they can find those arms and legs, and sure enough, hidden in an air vent, there they are. And while Till is looking at them, Andre picks up a bobby pin and puts it in his pocket. And Till figures the case is closed. The butchers must have done it, they're dead, pin it on them. But he says, no, that's not the case. Somebody was torturing Sean because they cut his dick off, and then they brought him to the butcher to cut the arms and legs off. They were clearly trying to extract some kind of information out of him. And she doesn't understand why he even cares. Just pin it on the butchers, get your third-class citizenship, move on. But he, A, doesn't want third-class citizenship. He wants to go back to the tail. And B, he cares because he's a cop. And she understands that because she wanted to become a detective and she was put on the first case and feels kind of guilty about what happened to Nikki. She lets him know how they had Nikki pinned out of the gate. It was a 3-hour tribunal and she had no shot. So the search for the real killer continues. And while the murder is still a very big deal to Melanie, the bigger issue right now is that the train has a window punctured in it. And it was an extinction because those were the last cows on the earth and now they're dead. And they really relied on those cows, not just for food, but also for fertilizer and other things. And she gets Jinju and Bennett alone, and they know it's a really bad situation. And to make it worse, water isn't going to flow in the train for a couple of days until that hole is fixed. So Melanie decides to ration off the water. Second and third class is going to get water for 15 minutes a day. The crops will continue to get as much water as they need as long as first class. And the tail, well, they're just going to have to make do with what they have. But the most important thing is that the three of them keep it to themselves just how bad the situation is. So as far as the rest of the train is concerned, it's just business as usual, just a little bit of a hiccup. They'll continue to press on, and they're going to pick new apprentices. And they pick those apprentices from the tail, and they pick 3 children. And one of them is a kid named Miles. And Miles' mother died trying to get on the train. He's really been raised by both Layton and Josie. And when he's picked, he has an hour to say goodbye to Josie. And the main reason that he's going is because he's heeded the advice of Layton, that they're going to need friends up train if they ever want to revolt. So he's going to go on this internship and try to make a better life for himself, but at the same time, not forgetting where he came from. And while Josie realizes this might be the last time they see each other, Miles says it won't be, don't worry. Now, speaking of Layton, he's had a very successful day, but he's put back into the cell for the night. And he immediately tears off a piece of fabric from his t-shirt and starts writing down a note. He then uses the bobby pin to sneak out of the cell, and he draws a little symbol on the ground, and then throws that piece of fabric a little bit farther down the hallway. And the reason he did that is because he wants to get the attention of the sanitation worker that he saw in the morning. He figures these sanitation workers are just told to keep their heads down so he'll see it, and sure enough, he does. But Layton needed to cause a distraction to allow the guy to bend over and pick up the piece of fabric. And unfortunately, the only distraction he can come up with is yelling, "Come get me." And he gets the shit beat out of him, but it does allow that sanitation worker to grab that message. Layton is then brought in front of Roach and Melanie, and not really interrogated, but more chastised for what he did. She asks him, "What do you see with this train?" He says, "A fortress of social class." And she says, "Well, I see the last remaining people on Earth living in order. And Mr. Wilfred is awake 21 hours a day trying to just keep the heat on for you people, but you're still not appreciative of it." And that's when Layton, who is covered in his own blood, looks up and says, "I guess that's why he needed Sean as an informant. Because Sean was a rat who was paid in perks. I mean, why else would you care about his murder?" So what you really want to know is, when he was tortured, what Wilfred's secrets did he give up? She kind of smirks at him and says, "Okay, you're very perceptive. No wonder why Mr. Wilfred wants you as the detective on the train. But just know, that is literally the only reason why you're still here." Episode 3 starts out with Dr. Klimt describing to the audience how exactly Snowpiercer works, painting a picture that Snowpiercer is really set up to keep every social class apart. And if you want to get further up the cars, you have to trade up to do so. Where for everybody, the goal is to eventually get to first class, but the game is rigged to keep first class really far away from second class. Melanie spends that morning addressing her crew with a, quote, message from Mr. Wilfred, because the last 48 hours have been tough, and it's encouraging them to just keep plugging forward. And in that speech, Commander Gray noticed that he paraphrased Churchill, which Melanie says, "I'll let him know that you noticed." And he says, "Well, let him know that there's unrest brewing. With the murders and the Taily uprising, people are getting concerned." And she says, to that point, Mr. Wilfred is suggesting that we ease the mind of passengers. She then turns to Ruth and asks, "Can you move the fight night from next week to tonight?" And then she asks Commander Gray to take control of the matter. And the fight night is a big deal because the winner of the fight is going to get an immediate boost from third class to second class. Melanie then goes to deal with Andre, who is sleeping in his cell and having a dream about the night that Zara left the Tailies. And you find out that Zara just couldn't deal with the lifestyle of the Tailies anymore. And even though she didn't know what the night car was, she was willing to take the chance just to get out of the tail. And right before she left, Andre ended up giving her his wedding ring, saying, "Take this, you can use it as a trade." But as she was leaving, she was getting crap from everybody calling her a sellout. You don't get any more of the dream because he's woken up by 2 guards who put a bag over his head and take him to a room with Roach and Melanie. Roach lets him know that if he tries to communicate with the tail again, he's going to stick his head out of one of those holes. Andre then asks, "Can I speak to the witness of the first murder?" And they tell him, "No, that's not possible. Nikki's not awake yet. She's still unconscious." He then asks, "Okay, well, what was Sean Weiss informing Mr. Wilfred on?" And Roach lets him know that Sean was keeping tabs on the black market and letting them know about this new drug that is wreaking havoc in the upper cars called Chronol. And Andre laughs because that drug isn't new to the tail at all. It's been around for 2 rotations. And that comes as a pretty big surprise to both Roach and Melanie. Andre says, "If you're looking for Chronol, just look for Osweiler the brakeman. I mean, if you give him a blowjob, he'll give you Chronol." And that's another thing that catches them by surprise. So that's what Roach and Andre do. They go talk to Blowjob Boy, and he's caught off guard in the dining car, and he immediately says he had nothing to do with Sean's death. And while that's very reassuring to them, they really want to know who his supplier is, but he says, "I don't have a supplier. I was just taking confiscated Chronol, and the only person I gave it to was that woman in the tail who got her arm froze off." But right after Roach and Andre leave, Osweiler is grabbed by a couple of janitors and taken to meet with a guy named Terrence. And Terrence wants to know what they wanted, and he says, "Well, they wanted my supplier, but I didn't say anything." And Terrence is wondering how Andre was able to go from a murder to looking for Chronol. And Osweiler says it's because he's smart. I mean, I really wouldn't underestimate this guy. And Terrence says, "Oh, don't worry about that. We'll give that cop a nice warm welcome." And then he kicks Osweiler out. Now, after meeting with Osweiler, Roach wants to go talk to Zara, even though Andre has told him that she had nothing to do with it. But he figures that there must have been something that Sean told her, but there wasn't. She says he never mentioned drugs. I mean, the closest he came to it was saying that he knew a guy who could get him anything he wanted. But even then, she doesn't have a name. Now, while Zara was getting interrogated, a few people in first class are a little bit concerned, and they're seeing through the fight night and the games as just a distraction from Mr. Wilfred from what's really going on in the train. And one woman in particular, a woman named Lilla, who has voiced her displeasure before and just seems like a real pain in the ass, tells Ruth this, and Ruth says, "Well, yeah, no, it is a distraction, but it's an entertaining distraction. And they're worried because while they've accepted the fact that this isn't a pleasure cruise, they feel like their fortunes have built this train, and now they're not safe because Mr. Wilfred has lost control of the train. I mean, we're talking first-class problems. And after they're done interrogating Zara, Roach breaks for lunch, and as he's eating, Andre's asking him about his marriage and if he had any kids, and you learn that he did have 3 kids, but 2 of them just didn't make it. And Andre feels like he can relate because he felt that loss when Zara went up train. He then asks Roach if he ever met Mr. Wilfred, and he says, yeah, I shook his hand a few times before we departed, but now he just speaks through Melanie. The two are interrupted by Till, who spent the morning with her girlfriend Jinju and learned from Jinju that Nikki isn't unconscious, she's actually awake, just not doing very well. And Till feels like she needs to solve this murder because she's the reason why Nikki is even in the drawers to begin with. Although Jinju warns her, do not cross Melanie, it's not a good idea. But with this information, she goes to Roach and Andre, and Roach, who is still on his lunch break, sends Andre and Till to go figure out what's going on with Nikki. Now, unbeknownst to them, Jinju has realized that she kind of screwed up during that pillow talk, so she gets in contact with Melanie, who is currently getting an update on the hole in the cattle car. And it's getting fixed, but at a very slow rate. And she's starting to get concerned because she can't keep pumping heat down there while these guys fix it. And Ben even suggests, hey, why don't we just get rid of the tail? But she doesn't want to go with that option just quite yet. So when she gets Jinju's call, she's a little stressed out, and Jinju says, hey, you don't want the investigators to see Nikki the way she is, right? Because I'm pretty sure that's where they're headed. And Till and Andre have arrived in Nikki's room to find her in really bad shape. And when Andre looks in her mouth, he sees all this black stuff and knows right away that it was Cronol. All the while, the doctor is reassuring them that this is completely normal, but she was under for so long, she looks in this rough shape, it's kind of hard to buy that. And the group is interrupted by Melanie, who has arrived and tries to break it up, saying they're not supposed to be here, they need to leave. And both Till and Andre think that this is very, very fishy. Till then asks if the drug that they use to put people to sleep is some kind of Cronol. And Andre says, well, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Cronol is a variation of that drug. And Melanie asks the doctor, that's not even possible, is it? But it is possible, and it's the truth. And this causes the doctor to come clean that Cronol is a street version of the drug that they use to put people to sleep. And a courier comes and grabs the drug from him, and in return, he gets stuff that he can use to help the sleepers that Mr. Wilfred just didn't think of. Stuff to help their bed sores, things like that. Andre then notices Miles' hair in a bag and freaks out and demands to know where Miles is. So they take him to Miles, who is flourishing in a classroom. He couldn't be any happier. He's got a bed. He's doing great in school. I mean, Miles is really thriving in the internship. But their meeting doesn't last long, and Miles goes in for a hug and tells him he's keeping his eyes open. But now that he's seen Miles, Andre wants to go and talk to Josie and give her an update on Miles because she's got to be worried sick about him. But Melanie doesn't allow it, telling him that Till can get her a message and you'll be able to see Josie once you figure out this murder. Honestly, we can't even get down Car anyway because of the fight night. And Andre says, well, fight night is a great time to see some janitor who's slinging drugs. So that's where Till and Andre head. They head right to the night car where they're hosting the fight night. And the first class passengers are watching it from above in the balcony, and they've noticed the arrival of Andre. And it just so happens on that night that one of the fighters is a janitor, so all the janitors are watching this go down. So the fight kicks off, and Till watches the janitors while Andre goes to talk to Zara because he feels like Zara isn't going to tell him anything with brakemen breathing down his neck. And that was a pretty good hunch because it was dead on. Because when they get alone, she tells him that the one janitor over there is Terrence, and that was Sean's Cronol hookup. Andre wants to meet with him, but Zara says there's always a price with Terrence. She then takes off his wedding ring that he gave her and tells him how she sold her wedding ring, but she always kept his. And maybe he can use it in a trade with Terrence. So Zara is able to get a message to Terrence, but Terrence doesn't show up. Instead, it's Osweiler. And Osweiler lets him know that Terrence can't risk being seen talking to Andre. But Andre reiterates that he needs to talk to Terrence. So get out there and tell him that I need a meeting with him. Now, during all of this, Nikki, who has woken up in her hospital bed, has made it out because they're siphoning electricity and the lock on the door wasn't working for a little bit. And she's made it into the night car and is watching the fight. And Till has noticed her and is trying to get her back to her room. But LJ, Lila's daughter, has also noticed her and is pointing her out, saying to everybody, look, that's the girl who was arrested for murder. What's she doing here? So Till's priority right now is to get Nikki back to her room. Andre, on the other hand, doesn't have to wait much longer to meet with Terrence. Terrence sends somebody to grab Andre, and they go to a private area in third class where the two can talk. Terrence tells Andre that he had nothing to do with Sean's death, but he does ask, how much does Mr. Wilfred know about the Cronol problem? And Andre says very little. In fact, I think if I solve this murder, he's just going to forget the whole thing, and they all have a good laugh about that. Terrence goes on to explain that the night that Sean was killed, he saw him with a guy from first class. Guy with a shaved head who takes care of himself. And the guy he's describing is a guy named Eric, who is always standing behind LJ. Right before he leaves, he tells Terrence that he just needs one more thing, and he pulls out the ring and trades for it. He then heads back down to the night car, and he tells Roach and Melanie that he has a description of the guy, but is unwilling to give it until he can go talk to Josie. So they give in. They allow him to go talk to Josie, and Andre gives her an update on Miles, but he also tells her how he saw Zara, and he's had it wrong this entire time. He just couldn't see the great thing in front of him. And then he kisses her. But when he does so, he passes something to her, and that thing was a small implant that allows people to get from car to car. And that was the thing that he traded his ring for with Terrence. He's then forced to give the description of Eric, and Eric has had a busy night because after seeing Nikki, he showed up outside of her room, killed the soldier that was guarding the door, killed the doctor, and then pulled up a chair and said, "Nikki, you don't remember me, do you? But you do know who I am." Episode 4 kicks off right after episode 3 that night when Eric kills Nicole. And while that's going down, Bennett goes to visit Melanie because he's genuinely concerned about her. He feels like she's burning the candle at both ends. As both Bennett and Melanie are discussing about how she needs to ask for help, she gets a call, along with everybody else involved in the investigation, and they find out that Nicole has been murdered. So when I say everybody that's involved in the investigation, that includes Jinju, who is the agricultural officer, and she just so happened to be with Till, and they were discussing their relationship about going public, although there are social stigmas about dating up car. And since Jinju is second class and Till is third class, she's worried about it. And then there's Roach, who ends up waking up Leighton in the middle of the night to let him know about what happened to Nikki. So when Melanie arrives on the scene, the doctor is inconsolable. He's bawling his eyes out because he cared for these patients so much, and he kind of blames himself for what happened to Nikki. Melanie tries to calm him down, saying, "We can make things right between you and Mr. Wilford, but what I need for you is for you to go get a gurney and some sheets because we need postmortem data, and nobody can see her like this." She then runs into Leighton, who is pissed off because Leighton gave her the description of Eric that night, and she didn't do anything with it. She was planning on using it in the morning, and Leighton feels like this is on Melanie. Till then mentions that the border has closed. And basically what this means is the person they're looking for must be first class, but still located in the third class. And that's exactly where Eric is as he awaits for the borders to open up. So with this information, Melanie gets her group that includes Ruth and Commander Gray, along with Osweiler, which Till is shocked he's not suspended, but Roach lets her know that they're short-staffed and he doesn't have a choice. And the plan is for Commander Gray's men to sweep up train, looking for any first-class citizen. But while they're discussing the plan, Leighton mentions that he needs to go to first class because they don't even know what they're looking for. And Commander Gray snaps back that there's no chance he's going to first class because it's a tailie. Melanie then lays down the law that Leighton will do whatever Mr. Wilford thinks is right. She then turns to Ruth and says, "You need to wake up every first-class passenger," and Ruth says they're not going to like that very much. And Leighton speaks up, "That's not very popular. You have a serial killer on the loose right now." Melanie, seeing the aggravation in Leighton's face, pulls him aside and says once they start the sweep up, both her and Leighton will head over to first class. And he says, "Is that your call or is that Mr. Wilford's call?" Before they can answer, they both see Miss Audrey, the owner of the night car, and Leighton says, "Well, while we wait, I'm going to go talk to her." And Audrey lets Leighton know that if the killer's from first, there's only so far they're going to allow him to get in this investigation, and there's going to be no justice whatsoever for Nikki. Leighton's starting to wonder how third class is going to take that, because all of the victims have been from third class, and he's worried about an uprising. He hints at her that he would like to use the fact that she's aware of everybody's secrets to his advantage in the investigation, but she says that's confidential. He then asks if Melanie Campbell's ever visited the night car and used the services, and she says it's confidential, and if the answer wasn't no, she hasn't shown herself like that. Audrey warns him that he needs to tread carefully, but many people in third class do want change, and then the two are interrupted by Melanie. Audrey leaves and Melanie lets Leighton know that they're awakening the passengers in first class. Leighton lets her know that there's not a lot of faith down car that this is going to be solved because everybody knows the killer must be from first class and they protect the first class passengers at all costs. But she tells him, "I don't care where the killer's from, I want it solved." So the two head up to first, where Leighton is disgusted to see the art display that they have in first class. I mean, in the previous world, these are $1 million paintings. And she sees the disgust in his face and she tells him, take all of that anger and use it. Because first it's going to protect their own, so be their worst nightmare. So he does just that. He walks right in and says, "First of all, I don't care who you are or where you came from. Because somebody in here has a thing for chopping off third class dicks." And LJ finds that hilarious, while the rest are just disgusted that a tailie is in their proximity. Leighton then goes over and starts eating their food and says, "The thing is, I don't see everybody here that was at the fight last night. Where are the bodyguards?" And nobody speaks up. So he says, "I'll put it a different way. You've taken 14 arms from the tail. I'll ask again. Where are the bodyguards?" LJ then pipes up that Eric didn't come home last night. And her dad mentions that he did ask to leave the fight early and he wasn't there when they got back. And immediately Eric has become suspect number one. Especially when LJ mentions that he had his gun with him. And guns aren't allowed on the Snowpiercer except for the bodyguards in first class. And Leighton finds this amazing because the rest of the cars were disarmed basically to keep the first class safe. Eric then mentions that he's going to need to see Eric's quarters, but Lilith pipes up saying that can't happen. And it has nothing to do with the investigation, she just doesn't want a tailie in their room. And she's reached a breaking point and demands to speak to Mr. Wilfred, so Melanie walks over and picks up the phone and pretends like she's speaking to Mr. Wilfred when in reality she's just speaking to Bennett. And she paints the picture that Lilith being a pain in the ass putting up a fight about this. And when she goes to hand the phone to Lila backs down and says, fine, I'll allow him in our place as long as Melanie accompanies him. So Leighton goes in there and tears his room up, to the utter disgust of Lila and her husband. And he's able to find out that Eric was in the Marines and was hired by the family to protect them on their way to Snowpiercer. And he saved LJ's life from rioters as they headed to the train. He also had a rough childhood and as a cat. But while searching his stuff, he finds a blunt object that was used to harvest bees, and he's wondering exactly what it's doing there because the bees died off 3 years ago. So Melanie sends Till there to find out which bee atrium it was taken from. He then asks LJ, do you think Eric could have done this? And she says, maybe. He sure wasted those riders on the way to Snowpiercer, and he always talked about having a mean streak. He then asks if Eric's ever gotten weird with her and aggressive, but she doesn't respond, asking him, is it true that you guys really don't get to see the sun in the tail? And since it is true, she likes to show off her remote control curtains and show him the sun. Melanie doesn't give up, though, and presses on about her relationship with Eric, but she says, we really shouldn't talk about it. And Leighton gives her a nod to basically leave the room so that he can continue to question her alone. So Melanie does that, but she goes out and starts questioning her parents. Now, while they're questioning LJ and her family, Eric has been found by Till and Osweiler in the 3rd class, and he starts running. On his pursuit to evade getting caught, he grabs Jinju, who is just speaking to a guy in 3rd class, and uses her as a hostage to get away. He fires a warning shot to try and get away, and it works. But not for long, because he gets to a point in the train where he is trapped, and he has nowhere to go. He has the gun pointed at Jinju, telling everybody to put their guns down, but instead of shooting her, he shoots a control box, hoping that would do something, but it doesn't. They converge on him, and they kill him. And Melanie finds out about this as she's interviewing the parents, where you'll learn that Eric has basically raised LJ. They're very close. So when LJ and the family find out that Eric is dead, they're understandably upset, but LJ is really upset. And as she's crying, Leighton indicates to Melanie that it's actually LJ who was the one who killed people. So Melanie goes and gets a soldier to come in, and the family wants to know what's going on, and Leighton lets him know that Eric was nothing more than a dog being told what to do. And it was LJ who was telling him to hold people down as she cut their dicks off and slaughtered them. And as he's walking away, LJ snaps, grabbing that blunt object that was found in Eric's room and tries to attack him, but Leighton is able to wrestle it away from her and she's arrested. Melanie then makes an announcement to the entire car that the killer has been found and somebody else is in custody and everything is returned to order. As soon as she signs off, though, Leighton says, now Mr. Wilfred has to deliver justice. Are you in charge of that too? But instead of responding, she says, let me go buy you a drink. And as they're both having a drink, she says, what do you think Mr. Wilfred's big secret was? And Leighton says, I'll be honest, I just want to go back to the tail. But she tells him, you know I can't let you go back to the tail. You've seen too much. And you've also figured a secret out. And that secret, of course, is that Melanie is actually Mr. Wilfred. But then all of a sudden, Leighton starts choking because Melanie poisoned his drink. And Leighton collapses. Now, back in the tail, they've taken the chip that he gave them and used it. Josie volunteered to be a sanitation worker for the day, and while on their lunch break, she was able to sneak out and connect with a former tailie who has moved up to 3rd car and is working in the food distribution portion of the train. So Melanie is able to connect with her and ask her for help, because since Leighton is up car, she wants to get messages to Leighton, and maybe she could use her as a go-between. And this is very dangerous, because if this girl is caught, she's going to go back to the tail, and she knows that, but she still agrees to help the tail because she feels that she owes it to them. So the group starts looking for messages through their food, and they end up finding one. But when they get it and open it up, it says that Leighton is missing, because Leighton has been put in the drawers by Melanie, who tells the doctor to keep it off books. Episode 5 takes place a few days after Episode 4, when the tail gets message from Astra that she needs to see Josie again, which is going to force Josie back on the sanitation crew. But they think it's worth it because they need the information on where Leighton is. So during the sanitation crew's break, Astrid meets him and right away tells them, I don't have any new information on Leighton, but if he's not in the tail, he's got to be somewhere. She switches clothes with Josie and tells Josie to head to the market and look for the yellow butterfly and meet a guy there named Terrence. He's the head of the janitors, and I think he'll help you. So Josie heads to the market and is looking around for the yellow butterfly, but instead of finding Terrence, Terrence's number 2 finds her first. She brings Josie to Terrence, and Josie goes on to explain that they think that Leighton is in the drawers, but they're not sure, and they need his help. And Terrence is trying to make sense of the fact that the guy who just solved the biggest murder in train history would be put in the drawers. That doesn't really make sense to him. And Josie says, I don't know, maybe it's because he turned over the wrong rock. And Terrence says, well, maybe he's dead. But Josie says that's not really possible if you ever met the guy, and of course Terrence did. So Terrence looks at his number 2 and says, you know, I think it's time we visit the drawers anyway. Can we get in there? And she says, yeah, of course. And all 3 of them head over to the doctor's office. As they go to get into the office, the number 2 pickpockets the keys off of the doctor, who is leaving to go see this trial of the century, which we'll get into in a little bit. And all 3 of them get in there. Upon getting in, she throws the keys to Josie and says, "Good luck." And both her and Terrence go and basically rob the place, while Josie is left to try to find out where Layton is, if he's even in there at all. Initially, she thought that they were going to help her out, but then she realizes, no, they're just here to rob the place. And as they're leaving, they tell her, "Good luck, don't get caught," and it's all on Josie. So of course that trial of the century has to do with LJ. And that day she's supposed to be put on trial in front of a tribunal. And usually the tribunals are supposed to be first and second class. So her parents aren't worried at all that she'll actually get convicted of a crime. But the fact that both victims were from third class leads to a pretty big push that they want in on this. And first class gets sent a message from third class when one of them arrives with a plate that is covered in cockroaches and shit. And this message forces Melanie to head to the night car and visit Audrey. And right away Melanie says, "I think that stunt was a little beneath you. I mean, I don't really get this. One suspect's dead and the other's on trial for murder. What is your issue?" But the thing that she's missing is the fact that Audrey thinks this trial is a joke because third class isn't involved at all when it was their two victims. And she points to one of the laws of the train that states that third class has the right to petition Wilfred in these kind of disputes. And Audrey wants a new tribunal drawn, including a third class passenger. And she can tell by the look on Melanie's face that Melanie doesn't want to do this. So she mentions the fact that Melanie used to want to make a difference there. Melanie mentions how she remembers the day that Audrey pitched the night car idea to her and Wilfred. And Wilfred thought it was nothing more than a brothel, but Melanie saw the long-term plan of this thing. And she was able really to pitch Wilfred on the idea. So in a way, Melanie's asking her to stay out of this. And Audrey shoots back, "Well, we depend on you to talk to Mr. Wilfred on our behalf. So convince him, like you did with the night car, that third class should have a voice in this thing." And right before the conversation ends, she reminds Melanie that third class touches literally every system on the train. Melanie's thinking about it, and at first she pitches it to Jinju, and then she pitches it to Bennett and Javier, trying to get their reactions on it. And Javier is completely against it, saying that the Folgers have a lot of power in first class, and they can make life a living hell for everybody. And if you think you have a social class war now, wait till this happens. Melanie wants to, we'll use the term, talk to Bennett privately. She has Javier run the train, and both her and Bennett go and bang one out real quick. And it seems like Melanie does this with him anytime that she's stressed out, because the last time they did something like that was when all of the bees died. But maybe it clears her head. Maybe she gets the answer she was looking for. Anyway, you'll slice it. She ends up giving in and accepting the petition and calling a third class member on the tribunal. So there'll be one first class member, one second class member, and one third class member on this tribunal. And this move is not popular at all in first class. And Lila Folger is a little bit concerned, but Roger Folger reminds her that the first class person will get the second class person on board. There's no way that LJ actually gets convicted of this thing. But that doesn't stop Roger from, along with a couple of other first class passengers, going to meet Commander Gray, because they're getting concerned of this sudden rule change. And they're starting to think that because Wilfred locked himself up train, that he's a little out of touch with the day-to-day goings of the train. But Commander Gray tells them that his job is to uphold rules, not to make them. They go on to pitch to Gray that maybe all the day-to-day matters would be better suited to be handled up train where it's affected the most. You know, typical one-percenters. Gray asks, well, what happens to Melanie Cavill? And Roger says she would be the first to go. Now, after this meeting, what they didn't know was one of those people decides to go and rat everything out to Melanie, telling her everything that happened in this meeting. And she's very angry, but her initial concern has to do with Commander Gray and his reaction, although he doesn't really have one. He listened to what they said, but he didn't really agree or disagree with them either way. But she needs to get to the trial, so she thanks the guy for the information, tells him that the renovations that he needs will be sped up because of this information, and sends him on his way. But she definitely has a problem, although she can't stew on it because of the fact that the trial is looming. Another group that needs to get to the trial is third class, and they've got Commander Till and Osweiler in the night car to take a couple of the third class citizens over to the trial. And Till has had a great day because she has been accepted on a probationary period to join second class citizens on the behest of Jinju, so she's in a great mood. And it even seems like her relationship with Osweiler is improving, although when Osweiler goes to talk to the third class citizens, he does so in a way that just completely insults them and acts like they're not even human beings. And you can tell that Till doesn't really enjoy that. The two of them get the third class citizens together and head up train. And the last person to get ready for the trial is LJ, who has spent the morning being coached by her mother on what to say and how to say it. And Lila is worried that maybe the trial of her daughter could be the spark that is needed to usher about change in the train that she doesn't want because it would negatively affect her life. So in her mind, it is imperative that LJ get off on this crime. So everybody heads over to the trial, which is broadcast throughout the train so everybody that's not there can hear what's going on. And the first person they talk to is Roach, since Layton is in the drawers, he can't talk. And Roach shows them all the evidence that they found in LJ's compartment, including all the cut up dicks. The second person they talk to is the person who did the autopsy, and she explains how all of the victims were cut up. The third person they talk to is Jinju, who talks about when she was kidnapped by Eric and how Eric was just transfixed on what happened to LJ and how to keep LJ safe through this entire ordeal. And the last person that speaks to the tribunal is Audrey. And she makes a plea to them that just because LJ is a first-class citizen, to not let that muddy these waters, to not let her off just because of her social status, and to not let Nikki's name go in vain. They then have a break for recess, to which afterwards LJ will take the stand. And during that break, Melanie sees Lila talking to a couple people, and she tells her, stop. Whatever you're trying to do, don't do it. But Lila tells her a story about how when LJ was a toddler, she was lashing out and stuck Roger in the eyeball with a fork. And as he was bleeding profusely, instead of getting mad at her, he still decided to coddle her. And Roger ended up losing his eye over this, which to this day, LJ doesn't really think was a big deal and actually treats it like a joke, playing around with his fake eyeball. But the point of the message is that they will do anything to protect their family. And most importantly, they will do anything to protect LJ. So if Melanie Cavill is trying to come at their family, she better watch out. Now, after the recess, LJ gets up there and tries to paint the picture that she was forced to do all of this by Eric, but then says how she can still hear the screams of those men. And as she's trying to fight back fake tears, she mentions how Sean was an informant for Wilfred, and that he made mention about how this beautiful train was being infested by these dark secrets. And there are 400 secrets that would rock us to the rails. And as soon as she says that, the look on Melanie's face is one of shock. And really, everybody in the know is shocked, including Bennett and Javier, who are in the front of the train. Because LJ just played a huge trump card in this whole thing. And as soon as her testimony is over, they break once again because the tribunal has to come up with a decision. And Melanie and Jinju go in a separate room, and Jinju goes, what the hell was that? And Melanie says, I don't know, maybe Sean found out the drawers were experimental. Maybe he found a list. I'm not really sure. Then she writes a message and sends it to Bennett. Now, during that deliberation in the trial, Josie might have inadvertently found out one of the secrets, which is the fact that the drawers are experimental, because when she's opening them up trying to find Leighton's body, she's finding people that she knows from the tale, including kids and adults. Eventually, she is able to find Leighton's body and ends up triggering something to wake him up, but because of the fact that she doesn't really know how to do it correctly, he ends up convulsing. And she doesn't really have time to fix it because both Till and Osweiler, who are making their rounds, see that the door is open to the doctor's office and head on in, which forces Josie into the drawer with Leighton. But because of the fact that he's convulsing, they end up hearing this and open up the drawer to find Josie lying on Leighton. Now, Till's initial reaction is, what the hell is Leighton doing in there? But Osweiler's initial reaction is, good, I can beat on a tailie. And as he starts to try to beat on Josie, he gets cracked in the head by Till, who knocks him out. Because Till knows how much Leighton did for that case and doesn't know or think he deserves to be in the drawers. So both her and Josie end up dragging his unconscious body over to Zara's piece of the train, and they have her take care of him. Where he's slowly trying to wake up, although waking up people from the drawers is a very dangerous process. And the whole time while he's under, he is dreaming about the time that they had to deal with the cannibalism in the tale, which is a very unsettling dream. Although, he does eventually wake up. The tribunal, however, does come to a decision, and that decision is that LJ Folger is guilty of all charges. But as soon as the verdict is read, Bennett sends on a message to Melanie, pretending that he is Mr. Wilfred, that says that because of her age, he is overturning the conviction and allowing her to go back to her parents. And of course, this is a huge deal, because all the euphoria that Third Class had when the conviction came out is washed away with just disgust about the fact that this first-class citizen gets off. But Melanie felt like she had no choice because clearly LJ knows the secrets of the train. And right before she releases LJ back to her parents, she tries to get those secrets out of her, but LJ is unwilling to give it to her. She is willing to give it to Mr. Wilfred, but of course we know there is no Mr. Wilfred. And before she goes back to her parents, she does say that because of the fact that Mr. Wilfred was looking out for her, she's going to look out for Mr. Wilfred's interests by not revealing these secrets to the train, and then the little psychopath is released back into her parents' arms. In episode 6, there's an issue in one of the cars after a breaker box malfunctions, and Javi and Bennett get an alert in the front of the car. But Javi is more concerned with giving Bennett shit because he's sleeping with Melanie. According to the rules, there is supposed to be no fraternization, but it's been 7 years, and Bennett says, time to get over it. Melanie, meanwhile, is trying to do yoga with Jinju, but she's just not really feeling it. because her main concern right now is that third class is planning on going on strike because of the Nikki trial. They're going to put all their tools down and just stop working, and Jinju makes mention that they're going to be hurt the most by this, and they don't even realize it. Either way, Melanie's planning on stopping it. She then asks Jinju how her night went with Till, because it was supposed to be Till's first night in second class, but Jinju says it didn't. She never came home. And of course, she never came home because she's dealing with the whole thing where she thought she killed her partner, but her partner was gone, so she was looking for Osweiler the entire night. Who, coincidentally, she does find, and very unlike Osweiler, he seems okay with what happened and is more concerned with going and doing police work about the third class uprising. Melanie then heads to third class, and they are booing the shit out of her. She makes an announcement on the behest of Wilfred that he has found out about the work stoppage, and she wants to remind everybody that they are on the train to work. That is their ticket. But they remind her that there are way more of them than her men, first-class passengers. They outnumber them. Although anybody that speaks up starts getting beaten on by the brakemen. She realizes that she's got to get out of there, but before she does, she says that if they do plan on going on with this work stoppage, then she's going to take 10 random third-class passengers and put them back in the tail. She's then going to replace them with 10 tailies. And if they think they have it bad now, wait till they get in the tail. Now, one of the people that was overhearing this speech was Leighton, who's trying to make sense of exactly how he got in Zara's place. She explains how he was taken out of the drawers and brought there by Josie, but she doesn't really know much more and wants to know how he got in the drawers. And he says he was put in the drawers because he solved the crime. That is it. Right after Melanie's speech, though, Josie shows up wearing Astrid's uniform. She tells Zara that she's got to get him out of here, because if they find out that he's missing, they're going to come after him. And she thinks she's found somebody that can help them out. Right before Josie takes Leighton out of there, Zara asks them if she'll ever see him again, and Josie says for your own good, probably not. Seems like Zara wants to tell Leighton something, but in front of Josie, she doesn't feel comfortable, so she just grabs a big jacket and gives it to him as a gift. So Josie starts helping Leighton walk through the train, because Leighton is in really bad shape, and eventually he just drops to the ground and says, look, I gotta tell you something. Wilfred is not on this train. Melanie Cavill is pulling all the strings. She is the man behind the curtain. Wilfred is nothing more than a myth to keep us in line. And that is the thing that got me put in the drawers. Now, you have to keep this to yourself, because I'm telling you and only you. Nobody in the tail can know until we figure out a way to use this to our advantage. But there is no Mr. Wilfred. It's all Melanie Cavill. While this news is completely shocking, Josie doesn't have time to dwell on it because she has to get Leighton to the person she thinks can help him out. And that person is Dr. Pelton. And she's going to help Leighton with the drawer hangover that he's currently experiencing. But one person that is not happy about this is Leighton, because he doesn't trust Dr. Pelton. This might be the drugs talking, though, because one of the side effects of coming out of the drawers is being agitated, and man does he fit that criteria. He starts questioning Dr. Pelton about who she works for, what she does, what her role is, and she says that her role is simply to work on the people when they come out of the drawers. At one point, she does call them prisoners, and Leighton snaps at her that they're not prisoners, they're lab rats. But she doesn't dispel Leighton's claim. She admits that they're using it for prisoners, but they're also using it for lab rats. She compares it to their very own North Korea in there. She then shows them some passenger files. Everybody on board has one. It breaks down your former work, your health issues, blood type, really anything people in the train would need to know about you. But the other things that the file include are a red X. And Dr. Pelton isn't 100% certain, but what she thinks the red X indicates is that you're on a blacklist. There have been long rumors about this list that you're put on as like an enemy of the state, and Leighton is on it, Josie is on it, and as of 2 weeks ago, Dr. Pelton also had the red X. Now, while Leighton is getting patched up, Bennett heads down in the train and finds out what's going on with that breaker box. And upon inspection, he finds out that it's affecting one of the brakes in one of the cars. Melanie meets him down there and assesses the damage and realizes that it's pretty serious and they gotta fix it. She heads to the school car and grabs Breachman Boscovich, who's kind of doing like a career day for all the kids, and she lets him know that he's needed down train. She also does a checkup on Miles, who is just thriving in his role as just, being a kid. Melanie then makes an announcement to the entire train saying that there's been a mechanical issue, and because of that, the third class train is restricted until further notice. And it's worth mentioning that this announcement broke up a conversation between Zara and Audrey, where you find out that Zara is pregnant. But the bigger issue is in Dr. Pelton's office, because when Josie hears this announcement, she knows that she needs to get back to third class immediately because Astrid's going to be waiting for her. But all Leighton can focus on is the voice he just heard. Melanie Cavill's. And when Josie goes and thanks Dr. Pelton for all she's doing and goes to leave, Leighton takes the IV out of his arm and grabs her chip and starts running up train. And because she doesn't have the chip, she's at the mercy of people opening the doors on their own, and she gets to a point where she's on the other side of the cage from Layton, begging him to come back. But he says, no, I can't do this. I might never get another chance to go after her. And unfortunately, there's nothing that Josie can do, and he goes and heads up train to find Melanie Cavill. And thanks to that announcement, he knows where she's going. She's heading downstairs to assess the damage of that break, and before she does so, she's talking to Ruth about what's going on and the update with the break situation, but Ruth's main concern is Mr. Wilfred. Ruth actually has no idea that there is no Mr. Wilfred, and ever since the trial went down, she's been concerned about his decision-making. She kind of vents to Melanie about this, but Melanie just reminds her that she works in hospitality and chill out. She then heads downstairs in the train, and as she's walking over to assess the damage, Layton pops up out of the shadows and grabs her and puts a scalpel to her neck. And boy, is she shocked to see him. He addresses her as Mr. Wilfred and lets her know that he is fully aware of what she's doing. If anyone says a bad word, has a nasty thought, they get thrown into the drawers. But as Layton is making these accusations, both Layton, Melanie, and everybody on board the train are thrown about because the brake that they're trying to fix has dropped and there's an issue. All of the cars are kind of thrown off kilter all of a sudden. Melanie then tries to scamper away, but Layton grabs her and she begs him to let her go because the train needs her. She says the drawers aren't what you think. They're not a prison, they're a lifeboat. Because if everything fails on this train, your best hope is to keep people in suspension. We need a system to restart. The 400 people in the drawers were selected because of things like race, religion, skills, health, and it's all for the future of humanity if something goes wrong on this train. She tells Layton that the train is dying right now and she needs to go fix it, and Layton lets her go. She reaches the crew and realizes that she will be the one that has to go under the train because Boscovich doesn't have the skill set that she has, and while nobody really wants her to go because she's in charge of the train, she's really the only person for the job. And unfortunately for her, she has 14 minutes to fix this, or else they're going to reach a point on the track where the entire train is going to derail. Layton, on the other hand, stumbles back to Dr. Pelton's office, where they are bracing for the worst. And Josie immediately wants to know if he was the one who did this, but he says no. But he did come back because he wanted to be with her, and the two have a nice, meaningful hug. Now, Dr. Pelton's office aren't the only ones that are bracing for the worst. First Class is bracing for the worst, and Till and Osweiler, who were in the prison at the time, are also bracing for the worst. And because everybody thinks this could be it for them, Till thinks this is the best time to tell Osweiler how she really feels. How she's not going to be extorted by him anymore, how she thinks he's pretty much a piece of shit, and how she can't stand how he treats people. He then brings up her handling of the Layton issue, but she says, you know that Layton never deserved to be in the drawers. Don't you think something else is going on? Don't you always feel like you're kind of left out in the dark? Now, there is one group that is handling the whole situation better than anybody else, and that is the tail. The woman who had her arm frozen off a couple episodes ago has succumbed to the injuries and passed away. And because of that, one of the tailies has taken it upon herself to try to cheer everybody up by making a periscope where everybody can see the outside world. So while the entire train is planning for the worst, all of the tailies are gathered around looking at this sheet that's projecting the outside for the first time in a long time. But at the final second, Melanie is able to save the train, keep it from derailing, and keep everybody alive. As soon as everybody finds out they're safe, euphoria erupts on all of the cars. Till and Osweiler get up to leave the prison, and Osweiler tells her, look, they're going to find Layton eventually, and it's also going to come out what you did, whether I tell or not. Till then heads to Jinju's for the first time and apologizes for not being there last night. She visibly looks troubled, though, and says, what if I'm not the person you thought I was? And when Jinju says, what does that mean? She just brushes it off and says, you know what, I need a drink. Boscovich and Bennett then walk into third class and are greeted with ovations from the third class passengers, who have completely forgotten about their strike. Bennett makes an announcement that it's going to take more than a little track turbulence to stop them, and everybody is overjoyed because they're alive. And a chant for Wilfred actually starts up. As Audrey's walking out, Melanie tells her, looks like they had a change of heart about that whole strike, huh? And Audrey tells her, well, they might have had a change of heart about this, but their grievances haven't changed at all. And next time, you're not going to have a disaster to save you. But Melanie says, hey, Audrey, why don't you try reading the room? We're alive. Be happy about it. And then finally, there's Dr. Pelton, who has put up both Josie and Layton for the night in her room as she shacks up with some other guy. And since there's only one bed, they both feel like it's a good time to consummate this relationship. And as they're doing so, the kid that they took care of, Miles, is summoned to Melanie's office. Melanie gives him a gift that Mr. Wilfred gave her personally, but says, Miles, there's something I need you to do for me. In episode 7, Melanie knows she has a problem because Layton has escaped and he knows the truth. She's talking to Bennett and Javi about what to do, and Javi thinks that they should just come clean, but she says no. He's not ready to reveal the secret yet. We can track him down. And one of the ways that they're going to plan on doing that is luring out Miles. During that close call with the train's brakes, they lost an engineer. and Miles would be perfect to become the new engineer. Even though he's extremely young, he's also very, very bright. So while he would be a good fit, this also has a lot to do with his relationship with Layton. So when Layton and Josie hear this, as they get ready for the day, they know that this is a trap. But Josie doesn't have really time to discuss because she has to get back to the tail Astrid is waiting for. And Layton is waiting for his ride out of there because he's still going incognito. So after Melanie makes that announcement, she starts trying to get answers as to what happened with Layton. Along with Jinju, she heads to the doctor who's in charge of putting people in the drawers and says, how could this have happened? When was the last time you saw him? He says, about 2 days ago, before the trial. He could have gotten out any time between then and now. He also says that there was some medical equipment that was stolen, and she knows that it must have been Terrence. So she calls him in and wants to know his relationship with helping Layton get out. Terrence plays dumb, saying he has no idea what she's talking about, but when she threatens to cut off his hand, he admits that he did meet Layton once, and that if he is running around, he's going to have to come to Terrence eventually, and that's when Terrence will grab him and bring him to Melanie. Melanie then heads off to figure out who she wants to interrogate next. Now, while Melanie was interrogating Terrence, Jinju was questioning Till. She asked, where were you the night of the trial? Why didn't you come home? Because Layton's missing, and that seems pretty convenient. But Till lies to her and says, I don't have anything to do with it. It was just I'm nervous about this whole second, third class move. Now, during this time, Bennett has gone off to tutor his new protege, Miles. And Miles has been congratulated by his classmates and even given an orange. Bennett starts quizzing him about certain things, and it seems like Miles is nervous until Miles throws up. And when he does that, he's immediately quarantined. He gets sent to the nurse's office where Dr. Pelton wants to examine him alone, but Bennett doesn't want to let him out of his sights. So they come to a compromise where she's going to close the door, but she's going to lift the curtain up. So Bennett is watching the whole time, getting hit on by Miles' teacher. And as Miles is getting examined, he sees a familiar face. Josie. Because Josie really wanted to see Miles even though Layton told her it's not a good idea. She made it happen. She apologizes for making him sick, but it's because she wanted to see him. She tells him that the revolution is going to start, and with him being at the front of the train now, he can be instrumental in it, and he says, I'm ready. She then says, there's something that we need you to do, and whispers it into his ear. The two then say goodbye, and Josie is able to escape before she's caught by Bennett. Now, her other half, Layton, has escaped into the night car with the help of third-class passengers. And he wants to kick off this revolution, but Audrey says, what do you think I've been trying to do? He says, bring me the key people that you trust. I have something to tell them. So Audrey does that, but some people aren't happy about it because they don't want to hear from Tailies and they don't want to hear from him. And he simply wants what they all want. No rations, no borders, just everything's open. And he says that there is a possibility of that happening. Some of them don't believe that there's even enough space, but he says first class has a damn bowling alley. There's plenty of space on this train. We're not coming for third class's beds, but there is enough space for everybody to coexist. He tells them that he got thrown in the drawers for what he knows because he pulled back the curtain on the man in the engine. And some of them may already know what he's talking about, or at least had a hunch on it. The group then disperses, and it's just Audrey and Layton hiding out in the back of the night car, and then in walks Terrence. Terrence tells Layton that Melanie came and visited me today and wanted to know where you are, and I told her that if I saw you, I would hand you over to her. But at the moment, he's not going to play favorites. He does, however, have his reservations about Layton's plan. Uniting the classes, it's not going to work. You guys don't have the numbers, so count me out. And then he leaves. Now, while Layton was busy trying to get this revolution started, Melanie was also pretty busy trying to track him down. The next person she went to was Zara, and she tells her that she hears that she's pregnant, and that's great, but certain privileges can be taken away, i.e. her child. So, let us know who helped Layton escape. So with that kind of ultimatum, she agrees. And Melanie, a bunch of brakemen, and Zara head back into the tail, where Josie has returned to, and says, that's her, that's Josie, and rats her out. Josie is then taken into an office to be interrogated, but brakemen aren't allowed in, and that's just not really protocol. Till is very surprised that Melanie wants to interrogate her herself, and only herself. Melanie and Josie start going back and forth, and it becomes obvious to Melanie pretty quickly that Josie isn't going to talk. She's not going to give up the location of Layton. So she decides maybe torture will be the best method. And she starts freezing her one pinky with liquid nitrogen and then breaks it. Now this wasn't fun for Melanie. She actually ends up throwing up because it made her sick to her stomach of what she just did. But while she's puking up her breakfast, Till wants to know what's going on, so she heads in there. And she sees what happened to Josie and feels terrible about it. And she says, how can I help you right now? She tells Till to get a message to Layton. He's hiding with Miss Audrey. Tell him that I made contact with Miles, and he's on board with the whole revolution. But Zara betrayed us. Till promises to get that message to Layton, and then Josie says, hey, one more thing. And that one more thing is freezing her entire hand. Now, before she heads back in to interrogate Josie some more, Melanie runs into Ruth. And it's Ruth's day off, and she's had a busy day. She got asked out by Commander Gray, and they had a really nice dinner. Seemed to be going well. It's Commander Gray's first date in about 2 years since his wife died. And while Commander Gray does actually like Ruth, that wasn't the entire point of this dinner. Because in walk the Folgers, and they question Ruth about management, getting Melanie out of there, and if Ruth would be interested in taking over if that happened. They think it's only fair that if they can change the rules for the trial, maybe they can change management. But Ruth, who is being a loyal friend, heads to Melanie to tell her what happened, but Melanie brushes it off, thinking that it's just a minor matter. Something small like the food or the linens. Not an actual big issue like Melanie getting fired. So when Melanie just brushes her off and screams at her, telling her to just do her job, Ruth says fine and walks off. Melanie then heads in and sees the hand is completely frozen. But that also allows Josie to break it off, and now she's no longer handcuffed. She starts attacking Melanie, and Melanie is fighting her off, and eventually the liquid nitrogen hose gets broken off and there's liquid nitrogen just flowing in the air. So when Melanie is able to get free, she locks Josie in the room to freeze to death. When Melanie walks out, she's greeted by Commander Gray, who wants to know why she did an interrogation without him. But she doesn't answer. She just says, take her to compost. And that's when Till knows what happened to Josie. Till is able to get those messages to Layton, but also lets him know about what happened with Josie. That night, Melanie meets with Miles and says, if you're ready to do this, when you walk through these doors, you'll be an engineer. Miles asks her if she's happy being an engineer, and she says, the needs of the train are more important than our own happiness. We're engineers. We keep the world alive. So, with that pep talk, Miles walks into the front of the train. And while Miles was getting a promotion, Layton was busy meeting somebody. In the back of the night car, where all the clients go, in walks LJ. At first, she's a little scared that it's Layton, but Layton says, I've been thinking about you and how much you like dirty little secrets. How would you like to know the dirtiest little secret on the whole damn train? In episode 8, Layton has put the wheels in motion to get the revolution started. And it all kicks off with LJ getting signaled from her car, from Miles, who's in the front of the train now, to come over and see for herself that there really is no Mr. Wilfred. And she does. She is blown away by the fact that Mr. Wilfred is a myth. And as Miles is showing her Melanie's empty cabin, she ends up taking one of the pictures of Melanie and her baby daughter for later. When LJ gets back to her room, she flashes some lights signaling that she did in fact make it to the front of the train, and that message gets relayed to Layton, who is in the night car holding a strategic meeting about the next day's plans. And in this meeting, you've got Miss Audrey, but you also have Till. And in this meeting, Layton lays out his entire plan, saying that if all goes well, they'll meet the jackboots mid-train. And that way they'll be able to fight them on their terms. After the meeting, Till goes and talks to Jinju and says, I can't tell you why, but you gotta stay out of third class today. And Jinju wants to know why Till lied to her about helping Layton. But Till wants to know why she told her to stay clear of Melanie Cavill. And Jinju says it's because you're messing with stuff you don't understand. And that's when Till realizes that she knew about Layton the entire time. She knew he was put in the drawers. And Till says, you were protecting her. And Jinju says, no, I was protecting you. Please don't make me choose between you and the train. But Till doesn't give her an answer and says, just stay in here today. Don't leave. The next day, armed with LJ's information, her parents, along with Commander Gray, call a meeting with Ruth. And they tell Ruth that they have inside info that there is no Mr. Wilfred. He's not even on the train. And Ruth doesn't believe that because she has no reason to. She met Mr. Wilfred once. That was enough for her, but she thinks this is ridiculous. But the Folgers let this information out, and it's causing a commotion in first class. They radio to Melanie to head there and deal with the issue. Now, Melanie was at the front of the train, teaching Miles all about the train, how if the train stops, everybody dies, that sort of thing. So when she gets called to first class and sees all the people, she gets a little concerned. She gets even more concerned when Ruth tells her that the issue is they think there's no Mr. Wilfred, and they want to see him in person. Melanie tries to pull the same trick as last time. All right, well, I'll call him up. You can talk to him yourself, but that isn't going to work. They need to see him in the flesh, and that's an issue. They tell Melanie that they have inside info that there is no Mr. Wilfred. And she says, well, who's the inside information? And that's when LJ gleefully puts up her hand, happy to reveal that she is the person who revealed the deep, dark secret. Melanie tries to discredit her because LJ is a murderer, and a few of the first-class passengers agree with Melanie. And this causes a bit of a commotion between the first-class passengers, but LJ says, no, look, I have proof. I was in her cabin, and I even grabbed a picture of her dead kid. And when Melanie sees that LJ did in fact grab that picture, she goes after her, but she's held back by a few of the jackboots. But that tiny commotion that was caused when people started questioning LJ's credibility has blown up into a big way. And all the bodyguards are now going after each other and have to be held back by the jackboots. So that's when Commander Gray gives the order to get every one of the jackboots up train because they need him as security. Melanie tells him, you can't do that. We need those people down train, but he says, I'm done taking orders from you. He then orders everybody into their cabins and Melanie Cavill to be arrested. Ruth tells Gray, what if you're wrong about this? What if we go to the engine and Wilfred is there. And Gray says, well, we need to see for ourselves, so let's head up to that engine. And up at the engine, Melanie has been able to signal to them to shut down the engine, and that's a huge deal. And when she's able to trigger that alarm, Javi and Bennett immediately go into a frenzy, not knowing why she's doing that. Miles wants to know why would they shut down the engine ever, and Javi snaps at him saying, I don't know, you've been here 2 days, you tell us. They then start hearing a clamoring outside of the door, and when Javi goes to look, he sees Commander Gray along with Ruth and a couple of jackboots and knows that there's a problem. And he wants to open the doors and just tell him the truth. There is no Mr. Wilfred. But Bennett yells at him that we can't do that. But instead of following Bennett's order to keep them out, Javi opens up one of the doors. And Bennett cannot believe that he just did that, still clinging to hope that he can keep this lie about Mr. Wilfred going. He ends up punching Javi and locking him out of the actual engine room. So when Commander Gray and Ruth and the jackboots find Javi, they start immediately questioning him, and he comes clean. Mr. Wilfred's dead. He's been dead for a while. But Javi says he had nothing to do with it. And it's true. Ruth goes into the living quarters of Melanie and sees that there is no Mr. Wilfred, and she cannot believe that she was fooled. She can't believe she's been lied to this entire time and can't believe that she's been such a fool not to see this before. And all she can think about is that Melanie needs to pay for what she did. Now, Commander Gray probably should have listened to Melanie when she said you can't draw all of the jackboots up train, because that was all a part of Layton's plan. He's been able to get word to the tail that the uprising is going to happen today and to prepare for it. He then gets escorted by Till back to the tail, where Till does have to take out one of her fellow brakemen in the process. But when the doors open in the tail, they're all ready to go to war. But that anger quickly subsides when they see that it's Layton. They're just so happy to see him, but then they start wondering, why is Till here? And Layton lets them know that Till is now one of them, and he even hands her a red armband that signifies to the tail that she's one of them. And then he gives an impassioned, riled-up speech to everybody who can hear it, that it's no longer one tail, it's one train, and today they make it to the front. Now, another part of Layton's plan has been to sneak a couple of tailies out and disguise them. A few of them are disguised as jackboots, and they're going to head to the drawers to wake up the tailies that were put in there from the last revolt. Another one is disguised as an electrician, and they're going to cut the phone lines. But after they do that, Osweiler ends up noticing that the electrician seems fidgety, and then he notices that the other one is a tailie. And because the phone lines have been cut, he makes one of the other brakemen run up train to let Commander Gray know. So as Commander Gray and Ruth and the Folgers are trying to figure out what to do about the whole Wilfred situation, in comes this brakeman who tells Commander Gray that the tailies have made it out of the tail and are moving up train. And Commander Gray knows that they've been squabbling about Mr. Wilfred's situation, distracted the entire time. This is no coincidence. So he needs to get down train as quickly as possible, and he feels like the easiest way to do that is to use the tunnels under the train. So when Commander Gray leaves to go deal with the tail situation, Ruth wants some answers from Melanie. She feels betrayed and just wants to hear the truth. And the truth is that Mr. Wilfred was nothing more than a guy used to sell tickets. He never believed in saving humanity at all. He believed in getting the easiest life for him with whores from the night car and a lot of booze, and that's it. And it was actually Melanie who built the train, not Mr. Wilfred. So if they had actually left it into Mr. Wilfred's hands, they wouldn't have made it one revolution, and Melanie knew that. So she left him on the platform and decided to take the train over. Melanie assures her that the friendship that they had was real and apologizes for lying to her. And Ruth takes this all in and tells her that you're a filthy liar and a murderer, and tomorrow you're going to be executed for what you did, for betraying Snowpiercer. And then she leaves. At this point, back in the tail, though, Layton, Till, and the rest of the tailies have made it to third class, where Roach and the brakemen are waiting for them. Now, Layton doesn't want to go to war with the brakemen, so him and Till end up going up and trying to see if they can reason with Roach. And Roach tells him that this crap that they're spewing about there being no Mr. Wilfred is ridiculous and no one's going to buy it. And Layton tells him, along with the rest of the third-class passengers who are watching all this go down, that it is true. There is no Mr. Wilfred. And first class just found out about it now, and it's only a matter of time before third class finds out about it. And because there is no Mr. Wilfred, someone's going to have to run this train. And since third class and the tail already kind of make this train go to begin with, it might as well be one of them. So let's work together instead of going to war now. They beg Roach to move over and just let them pass through. And it seems like they talk a lot of sense into Roach because he gives the order to stand down and they let the tailies move on through. The jackboots, though, are on their way in the tunnels, but Layton's already thought of that. And he sent a couple of tailies down along with this catapult-like weapon to take them out. And boy, does that ever work. Because Commander Gray, seeing that it's going to be tough to just bully their way through it, leaves half of his soldiers in the tunnels, but the other half he takes upstairs to just catch them head on that way. And they end up meeting in the night car, where Layton's plan has worked. They've drawn in all of the jackboots along with Commander Gray and kind of trapped them there, where they have the element of surprise. And in the night car, a bloody, vicious battle goes down. I mean, both sides are suffering casualties left and right, but it seems like Layton's crew ends up getting the best of Gray's because Gray gives the order to retreat. Shortly after Commander Gray's troops leave, Layton, along with the rest of the third-class members and the tailies, are just looking at all the casualties go down, tending to the injured, when some of the jackboots come back and throw a bunch of smoke bombs down in the night car and forces Layton and his crew to go to the third-class cafeteria. As Commander Gray is walking back up to first class to regroup, he passes by the room with the drawers. And Layton's guys, who are dressed as jackboots, have been able to wake up two of the members, one of whom is that ridiculously big, strong guy that didn't talk. And when he woke up from the drawers, he was speaking Mandarin, to which the doctor said, "Does he speak Mandarin?" And the tailie said, "Dude, he doesn't speak at all." But with the fighting going on, they were waiting for some reinforcements from the tail that never showed up. And the doctor says, "Where are your people?" And the tailie says, "I have no idea." The doctor, getting nervous, says, "We should just leave now, come back for the sleepers later." But the tailie says, "No, we're not doing that." And then he goes over to wake up the last person from the last revolt, and that's Pike. But when they open the drawer, Pike is gone, to everybody's shock, and the tailies are looking at the doctor for some answers. Now, Pike has been woken up by Commander Gray and the rest of the first-class passengers to get some answers and info on Layton. And Pike, who never really got along with Layton in the first place, is happy to give it because he's getting all the amenities of first class at the moment. And he tells him that Layton is a good cop, but he doesn't have the stomach for sustained cruelty. So if you keep grinding on him, he's going to crumble. And you can kind of see that in the third-class dining car as Layton is looking over all of the casualties and the injured, and he feels really uncomfortable because he lost a ton of people that day, a lot of whom were his friends. And you can see the doubt start creeping in his mind of if he made the right decision by lighting this match on the Revolution. Episode 9, the first class is figuring out their next move, and they're all kind of torn on their priorities. Commander Gray lets them know that the plan is to gas out most of the third class and the tailies, and one of the people brings up, how do you not gas out civilians? But Commander Gray's not even thinking of that. They're just going to be a casualty. Javi, who is now working with First Class, thinks this is a terrible idea, knowing that they need workers, but Lila Folger says, well, we're overpopulated anyway, and we'll just train new people. So that's one priority. The other priority is with Ruth, because she wants to make the execution of Melanie Cavill a public thing, to where then they can hand over the train to whoever's going to take it over. But Lila Folger says, well, if we don't figure out what to do about the tailies in the third class, we're not going to have a train to hand over. They're basically at the gate right now. So you can see that there's definitely signs of a power struggle going on, and part of that power struggle involves Commander Gray, who takes Javi to the front of the train to get him at the engine, but Javi can't get in. He tells him that Bennett is loyal to Melanie and will hold off as long as he can. Javi says, well, maybe we don't have to gas everybody if Layton gives himself up. But Gray kind of laughs that off and threatens Javi's job if he doesn't get them inside. So Javi says, I'll go to the back of the train and override the system. Commander Gray then runs into Ruth, who is in Melanie's cabin, and is absolutely amazed at the lengths that Melanie went to keep the Mr. Wilford situation under control. The fact that she had his journals, the fact that she had voice recordings of him so that she could doctor the announcements. I mean, she's amazed. And this is kind of turning Gray on a little bit. And he pitches to her the idea that both Ruth and Commander Gray could then take over the train. And since power is nature's most powerful aphrodisiac, she ends up kissing him. She loves that idea. The rest of the power struggle comes from the Folgers who want to be in charge and the rest of the people who don't want to see them in charge, and are going to great lengths to make sure that they aren't ever in charge. Now, Javi had mentioned Layton surrendering, and that wasn't just a thought. The first class has sent Pike back to third class to talk to Layton about surrendering, giving him the option that if he surrenders, they won't gas anybody. But if he stays and fights, they're going to go car to car, scorched earth, killing everybody. So while it seems like a pretty easy choice, Layton's on the fence about it, and Pike gives him an hour to decide. So Layton goes and talks to Audrey and Till about it, and Audrey says, well, even if you turn yourself in, it's not going to end with you. And both of them urge him not to surrender. Before Layton leaves the car, Audrey pulls him aside and says, you have to talk to Zara. So Layton reluctantly does so. He hears Zara's side of things about the Josie situation, and she apologizes, and Layton's still very standoffish to her, until she brings up the fact that she did it for her baby, and she did it for their baby. And then she grabs Layton's hand and puts it on her stomach. And when Layton finds out that he's going to be a father, it changes his whole mindset. By not surrendering, he wouldn't just be killing random people that he knows, he would be killing his unborn child. And that is something he can't do. So he's made up his mind, and he sees Till before he does so, and Till wants to get ready to work, but he says, no, Till, it's over. And she kind of feels betrayed because she believed in him, but he's made up his mind. He finds Pike and says, all right, I'll surrender. So Pike heads to first class and tells him that Leighton has agreed. They will get Leighton's head, and the people in third and the tail will get mercy. Ruth goes off to tell the rest of the first class and the second class passengers what's going on, and Commander Gray heads off to deal with the surrender. And LJ goes to her parents and says, you guys should be there because these people are looking for a leader, and they're just going to think that Commander Gray and Ruth did all of this. And the Folgers agree that if anyone from first class could step up, it's going to be them. Now, during all of this, Melanie Cavill is sitting in that third class prison with a lot of the people from third class and the tail who were arrested during the riots. And she's waiting to be executed. And the way they execute people is by freezing their lungs out. It seems like a very painful process, and Melanie's terrified. When her name gets called, she's waiting for the air to hit her lungs, but then Javi pops out of nowhere and saves her with the help of the woman who's set to execute her. That woman ends up stalling and giving Javi enough time to get Melanie out of there. Melanie makes her way through the ventilation system and finds her way to third class, where Leighton's about to turn himself in, but Melanie says, you're going to want to hear me out. I can get you the train. Because Snowpiercer isn't going to survive with Commander Gray or the Folgers in charge. And her plan is to disconnect a certain section of the train that is filled with jackboots at a precise time when the track is going to split. Bennett would switch the track over, so the front of the car goes left, the jackboots car goes right, and then as soon as they're passed, Bennett will switch the track over and the rest of the cars will go left. Bennett will then slow the front of the train down, and the back of the train will clip in and they'll head off. Everybody in the jackboot side will die. And while this is very risky, it can be done if it's done at the right time. Till says, if what you're saying is possible, then we're just giving you an avenue back to power. And she says, no, if this works, I want to be in power. Leighton would. Leighton can't believe that she would just hand over power. And she says, it was never about that. It was about saving humanity. What do you want me to do? Say I'm a terrible person? Say that I did all these bad things and I'm power hungry? What would that solve? My way didn't work. Let's see if your way does. And since they really don't have another choice, they agree to go along with Melanie's plan. Melanie then explains to Leighton his role in this whole situation. He's going to be downtrained. And then she's able to radio to Bennett on a private radio that's rarely used, his role in things. She then cuts out the chip from her arm that's able to open up every door and hands it over to Leighton so he's able to get through. And as she's doing this, they're interrupted by Roach, who has shown up thanks to Till, and he really just showed up because he couldn't believe his eyes that Melanie Cavill would be helping the rebels in this situation, but there they are standing in front of him. He asks, let me ask you, what happens if this plan of yours doesn't work? And she says, well, the front of the car is going to starve, while the back of the car is going to freeze. He says, all right, just so we all know that this is a stupid idea, let's go, and he agrees to help them. So they all synchronize their watches because once Melanie pulls the lever, Leighton is going to have 3 minutes on his end to do the same. And he's got to do it at the precise time. Roach's role in this whole thing is he's going to escort Leighton up train to be, quote, executed. And when they get to first class wants to make a whole show of this with pictures and announcements, but Roach hurries them along knowing that they don't have a lot of time. When Leighton gets through the jackboots, they start roughing him up a lot, and Roach ends up finding a gun and pointing it at Commander Gray and saying, uncuff him. Commander Gray is able to get the gun away from him, and they get into a fight. And it's not going well for both Leighton and Roach until all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Strong Boy, who is out of the boxes and still speaking Mandarin, pops out and takes everybody out. This frees up Leighton enough time to get to his spot in the train that he's supposed to execute the plan. But when he gets there, he sees through the glass all of the third class and tailies that have been arrested. He goes to try to free them, but he can't find a key. And with time running out, he doesn't have a choice but to leave them there. And it's sad because a lot of these people are his friends, but he's got to do what's best for the rest of the train. So Leighton frees up the train and everything works. The jackboots go right, the train goes left, and they're able to reconnect. And people like Commander Gray and the Folgers, everybody except LJ, are left to die in the freeze while the rest of the train is freed up. When Leighton sees Melanie again, he's mad at her because he says, you knew that I would have to kill those people. And she says, I knew you'd have to make that choice. And those are the kind of choices that we have to make every single day as the head of the train. And then she says, but you have the train, Leighton. In the season finale, Melanie hops on the mic and makes a speech about choices, like the choice about climate change and her choice to pirate Snowpiercer and lie to everybody. And she's also making the choice to give up the train to the rebel forces, and then she leaves Leighton to address the train, where he introduces himself. After this initial announcement, Leighton goes to find Miles and explains what happened to Josie, and Miles is very shook up about it. He's crying, and Leighton tries to console him, saying how much that Josie loved him and loved Leighton and loved all of the tailies, and they'll get through this together. He then goes to address first class who are having their issues, and Leighton announces that the brakemen, along with some rebels, will handle order in the train for the moment until they can vote on a governing body. But most of the first class is concerned because of looting. And while Leighton says, yes, there has been looting, we have it under control at this time. And as you'd expect, there's a lot of infighting between the first class passengers and the third class / Taily group on who's to blame for all of this. And it's kind of led by Ruth, who is disgusted at what's going on in Snowpiercer. But Leighton says, we look to ourselves now. We're not putting anybody in any drawers. We're not taking arms. This is on us. He then tells them that you all are department heads and passenger reps. So the message is clear to all of you guys. The train is ours now. It's everybody's. And it's ironic because they're about to pass through Chicago where all of this started. And it's through Chicago where they'll kick off a new revolution. But Ruth isn't buying this and tells Roach as much, saying that a utopian society is never going to work on Snowpiercer. Now, one person who sees that looting firsthand is LJ, who walks into her first class cabin to find Pike, Terrence, and a bunch of other third class / tailies that she doesn't know. And she is scared and crying and begs them to leave, but Terrence says, well, if you see somebody you like, just take their dick. She ends up trying to get them to turn on Pike by saying that he sold her out, but he ends up getting annoyed about that and throwing her out of her own cabin. She ends up finding her way to third class and becoming friends with another outcast, Osweiler. Now, LJ isn't the only one getting used to her new role, because Leighton is another person dealing with his new role, but it's not just as the front of the train, it's as dad. He goes and talks to Zara, and Zara is convinced that their baby is going to be a girl, but she's concerned that they won't ever be able to get over the whole Josie situation, and Leighton says, look, our family is never going to be as picture perfect as we thought, but we will make this work. And then there's Melanie, who is about to hunker down in the engine room, has decided that she's been putting off getting a therapy session at the night car for far too long. So she heads to the night car and does that therapy session with Miss Audrey, and it all focuses on her daughter and how upset she is that she put work first, she neglected her family, and she left her daughter on the platform to die. And she would give anything to hold her daughter again. After her therapy session, she heads to hospitality to have a conversation with Ruth, who still hasn't forgiven her for what she's done. And she has a whole new issue with being mad at her because of the fact that she's left the train the way it is to go hunker down in the engine. And Ruth kind of has a point. Snowpiercer is hurting at the moment. They're very understaffed, and they need leadership, and Ruth just doesn't think that Leighton is the person to do so. Melanie reminds her that democracy used to work, and sometimes you have to lose something to find it again. But Ruth can't accept that and can't get over the fact that she just killed all of those people, many of whom were Ruth's friends, including Commander Gray. It seems like this relationship can't be fixed, so Melanie says, I'll see you around, Ruth, and Ruth says, I think we've already said our goodbyes, and then she slams the door on her. So that seems to be one breakup. Another is Till and Jinju. Jinju is explaining to both Roach and Till how their crops are decimated by the looters, and now they're demanding that everybody get an equal share of calories, which is close to impossible, because they're completely understaffed and have been working about 48 hours without sleep at this point. This morphs into a fight between Jinju and Till about the fact that Jinju didn't tell her about the Mr. Wilford situation. And the fight comes to a crescendo when Jinju says, well, I guess we're in agreement now. The train is all that matters. And they seem to break up amicably. Now we'll move to the front of the train where Javi has been fixated on this music that's coming through that radio frequency they rarely use. Bennett brushes it off as nothing, but he sees something on the satellite feed and decides it's best to turn that feed off and act like it's not working. But he can't brush it off forever, because when Melanie arrives, the first thing that Javi brings up is the music going on, and the first thought that she has is, oh my god, there might be survivors out there. She has to see the satellite, but that's gone. The directional antenna has also been cut by Bennett, who is claiming that he's trying to get everything back on board. So they're having trouble triangulating exactly where the signal is coming from, but they know that they're getting closer to it because the signal is getting stronger. And they also know that if they don't slow down, they're going to miss it. So she says, I got to get Leighton up here. But Bennett says, you don't need Leighton, come on. She says, no, I do, because we're ushering in a new era and I need his approval on this. So Melanie was dead serious about handing the train over to Leighton. And Leighton at the moment is in the third class dining hall dealing with an issue after Roach caught a couple of tailies stealing a cart of lettuce. Leighton says, come on, where were you taking the lettuce? And they admit that they were taking it up to first class where Pike is. So now Leighton has that issue to deal with. But he has to abandon that situation when he's called to the engine. And when he gets there, Melanie fills him in on all the details. He asks if it's even possible that there are survivors, and she says, I mean, maybe. It's been 6 years since we gotten a hit on this thing, but they don't use it very often. All the while, Bennett keeps pushing it off like it's nothing. Melanie, though, knowing it's something, lays out the two scenarios for Leighton. The first is that they can take speed off, but if they do that, they'll be in deficit. They're going to be using more power than they can actually generate. They're already near emergency reserves, and they're planning on slowing down near Chicago. The other scenario is they race past the signal without pinpointing it, and if they do that, it's going to be a whole other revolution before they're coming back to it. Layton says if there's any possibility that there are other survivors out there and we're not alone, then it's our duty to make contact, and Melanie agrees. So they order the train to slow down. So they slow the train down, and they're able to locate where that signal was coming from, and it's coming from a completely other train. And that other train is set to meet them at a junction point. Melanie, feeling like this is Mr. Wilfred, is now worried that they're going to be boarded by this other train. And the math says they're not going to be able to outrun this train. She tells Layton, if Wilfred boards us, it's going to be worse than whatever we just went through the past couple days. So Layton says, okay, well then I'll get some guys down training the tail to make sure that doesn't happen. Before he leaves though, Melanie warns him that if he is able to get on the train, the cars are going to be divided. And boy, is that ever true. Because while Melanie is worried about Mr. Wilfred's return, Ruth, who is in first class, is ready to roll out the red carpet. As Layton is making his way down to the tail, he picks up Pike from first class, kicks him out, and brings him back to the tail to fight off any Wilfred intruders. While Layton makes his way towards the tail, Melanie is using every ounce of power that she has to try to outrun Mr. Wilfred's train. But it's not enough, as the second train is able to get a hold of Snowpiercer. It also tries to hack the train to slow the engine down, and Melanie knows that there's only one way to stop the train from being hacked, and that's to go outside on the top of the train and cut the uplink, which is extremely dangerous. Melanie and Bennett go to put their suits on to head outside, and Melanie asks Javi to keep Mr. Wilfred at bay as long as he can. Right before Melanie is actually to go outside, though, to cut the uplink, Bennett makes a plea to her not to do it. Because in his opinion, they need that supply train. Snowpiercer is quickly falling apart, and they need everything on that other train. But Melanie says, how do you know that any of the things that you're saying are on that train are actually on that train? And more importantly, what is Mr. Wilfred going to want? She then accuses him of knowing the entire time that they were going to run into Mr. Wilfred's train, and he admits that, yeah, he saw it on the satellite feed and killed it because he thinks it's best for the train. So since he made that decision by himself, she makes a decision by herself and cuts his hose so he can't go out. And then she heads out by herself to cut the uplink. But right before she does so, she tells him that whether she dies or not, he will keep Snowpiercer going one way or the other. So as Melanie heads out in the freeze on the moving train, she's too late. Mr. Wilfred is able to stop the engines, and Melanie ends up flying off the train into the snow. Layton, who is in the tail, is waiting with the rest of the tailies for Mr. Wilfred to get through the steel door when Ruth shows up with literally a welcome committee of children. They tell Ruth to get out of there, but she ends up pulling a gun on them, claiming how she's hospitality and it's her job. And while this might be Layton's democratic experiment, she is the head of hospitality, and she will be there to greet Mr. Wilfred upon his return. So Layton orders everybody to put their weapons down and tells Ruth that she will be at the front of the train along with Layton, side by side, when Mr. Wilfred arrives. And she likes this idea and ends up handing over the gun. But when the door opens up, it's not Mr. Wilfred, it's a girl. She announces to everybody that Mr. Wilfred has overtaken their engine, and they have 13 minutes until the cold overtakes them. So they need to decide whether or not to peacefully surrender. Layton says that they need to see Mr. Wilfred face to face, but the girl says, is Melanie Cavill here? And since the tail is unaware that Melanie Cavill has actually been thrown from the train and is outside of it, they say, yeah, she's alive. Why? Who are you? And that's when she reveals that she is Alexandra Cavill. She's Melanie's daughter. And she wants to see her mother, who unfortunately is outside of the train with no real hope of getting back inside. And that is how Season 1 of Snowpiercer ends. So thank you so much for watching this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Like the video if you liked it. Thumbs down if you don't. If you know somebody that needs a recap of Snowpiercer, please consider sharing the video. And if you want to hear my thoughts on things, check out my podcast, Scene Invaders. Oh, and I don't read the comments because most of the time they're nasty comments. So if you said something nice and I don't respond, don't take it personally. Just know, though, I do appreciate everybody checking out the video.